Welcome to the Create and Grow podcast. We are with you live today on this beautiful Tuesday, and it is an honor to be sharing also, just more hands-on information about how to really bring in creativity. And as you know, my work is in intercultural creativity, neurosomatic creativity, and prismatic leadership. How do we bring that work in and make sure we're inclusive for all and make sure we're helping develop and support the IntelliKey, right? That's a new word I talked about a few shows ago. The IntelliKey of people, which is the hidden potential of people. Just like you look at a nut or a seed, there's a whole forest within that seed. That's the IntelliKey, the potential that seed carries. And we carry IntelliKey as well. So I have with me a wonderful, wonderful guest today. You know me, I always look for the brightest minds out there. And let me pull up her bio. And I would like to introduce you to Miss Lisa Drennan. She's the founder of Merge Inclusion Consulting, and she is paving the way for recreation and community-based programs to enhance their capacity to create authentic disability inclusion where all are participating and belong together. She has won a wonderful credibility list where she's worked with transitioning to the South Shore YMCA. She's the assistant as an association director of inclusion in 2014. She expanded her impact by developing innovative programs and playing a crucial role in staff training and emphasizing the importance of social and recreational inclusion. And her national recognition as a leader in the field. And she was appointed as a co-chairperson of the USA Diverse Abilities Working Group. So a lot there. And she is definitely a thought leader. Let me bring her to the stage so you actually can see who I'm talking about. Hello, Miss Lisa.
Hello. Thank you for having me here.
Nice to have you. And I just love talking about intercultural creativity and creativity just as a general topic, but from different perspectives. My logo is the diamond, and we are multifaceted. As people, we're multifaceted, but also as leaders, right? We're multifaceted. Be able to see different perspectives of a concept and a situation or environment, and really looking at creativity from your lens, right? The work that you do, I believe, is profound. So before I keep going on, let people know who you are and how did you get to the place of where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And my journey started when I was 17 years old. So I'm officially into the 4 decades and able to say that. I was 17 years old, started working in my hometown. It was a residential community for adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I worked there first initially as a direct support worker, right? We were just called staff at the time, but we have more professional titles to it nowadays. Through that work, I became interested in being a recreation director. So that space of offering things where folks could participate in something of choice, whether it be art or music or fitness, and you could see somebody shine. That was really important. I started to recognize that someone's potential, their personality would start to come out when they had that palette to be working with, right, so to speak. And I loved the recreation space, and I loved learning how do we teach in this space. So as I was hiring a music instructor, art instructor, I would be thinking about how do we teach so that every person around this table has an opportunity to meaningfully participate. So that became one of my my pillars, right, of what I'm about. And you'll see it kind of adds up to where I am today. So move forward. I helped to build a wellness center on that campus. And that whole process just, again, really helped me to align with how do we teach in a way that everybody's meaningfully participating in this wellness center. So it was just for folks with intellectual developmental disabilities. Now move forward, and I go to the YMCA in 2014. After 30 years of working there, I still consider it a home to me. But at the Y, now I'm working with, and this is part of my aha moment, typical staff who offer programs for the general population. So someone who is a camp counselor, someone who teaches Zumba, right? Someone who's working the front desk, or a person who is overseeing their before and after school programs. And I'm teaching them how to include in to what they already have, right? How to include in folks with intellectual, developmental, or what I use the term diverse abilities into what they already have. And it was a
Mhm.
huge aha moment for me to recognize that for 30 years I had only been working with folks with disabilities. So here, right here they are in the community, in this community here, with people who are trained to work with them specifically. Now that big aha moment at the Y was, oh, wait a minute. We need to be training the rest of the world. If we really want inclusion to happen, we have to train the rest of the world or give the tools and confidence to someone else that maybe did not have that background that I had for 30 years, right? And that was my aha moment. There's something missing here in our world, something we need. And I often refer to a bridge, right? There's this side of the bridge is individuals who have diverse abilities or disabilities, their families and agencies that support them. And here's the whole community over here. And it's always been up to they're trying to get into the community, be part of the community, and the community saying, but I don't know how to work with these folks, right? We don't know how to do this. We can't, don't they have their own special programs? And my idea is just, we have to like blow this all up and think about it as strengthening a bridge. So if we train this side and give them the tools and confidence, and this side can now it can be a bridge and it can come together and it can be strengthened. It has to come from both sides. So that was my aha moment.
Mhm.
And
And I'll pause you
yeah,
there. I would love to jump in
yeah,
and just pull out the gems. That's my
yes,
logo, and it's also a teaching tool. It's really, and the bridge, is the last of my 7 gems of intercultural creativity. Being a bridge, right? Building a bridge and connecting across cultures. And if you look at my diversity diamond. Uh, I love your term diverse abilities, right? Because
yeah,
you're including so many things there. But that's what some of the lenses, that influence how we see the world and how we push into the world and how the world pushes back, right?
yeah,
Which changes our brain and things along those lines. And I also love the fact that you started your career with really looking at the arts too, and
yeah.
how you said the arts really brought out people's ability to shine. I love that because the arts are a method, a methodology to bring out other skills that people really may not even know that they had, right?
Yeah.
And what another way to have that inclusion of allowing people to practice things that they probably would not have normally engaged in had that
Mhm.
platform not been there. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing
Yeah.
that part.
No, absolutely. And when we think about that term diverse abilities, and just to clarify, it's actually in the title of the longer title of my official title of my company, Merge Diverse Abilities Inclusion Consulting. And there's a reason why I picked that term. And now here's what I'm thinking about. Right. If you have a group of people in front of you, it doesn't matter, any group in front of you, you're a teacher, a coach, whatever your role is, a group of folks are in front of you, let's say 20 folks, there's a really good chance that somebody in that group is going to learn differently, participate differently, or experience the world around them differently. And that can be impacted from anything from a, learning disability to cognitive disability, right? It could be a medical complexity, social emotional issues, non-apparent or hidden disabilities, which 70% of disabilities are actually non-apparent. You can't tell by looking at a person, right, directly, to all the way to intellectual developmental disabilities like Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. So when I think about it, and this is really the anchor of how I think we should look at the world, we should assume that there are diverse abilities within that group
Mhm.
and offer what we offer or present or teach or supervise in a way that we are assuming that there will be folks in that group with diverse abilities. And so we need to change the way we teach or instruct or lead, and to be thinking about the different ways that somebody might learn. Because mostly our world, and it's a funny thing to say, but our world has been built by, right, non-disabled, neurotypical folks, right? And pretty much. So we everything that has been crafted in a way that speaks to that population and isn't really considering somebody who might, be missing a limb or be hard of hearing, or they may have, social emotional issues, anxiety. The list goes on and on. So when we think that way out of the gates, then we are setting up for more success rather than making somebody stand out because I can't do this. And then you've got to address it in that way if you teach in a way. So that's part of what I teach is how do we make it more universal design is what it's called, actually.
Yes, actually, I was going to bring that term up. I was like, I think
I love it.
universal design, where they use the wonderful example of sidewalks. Like if we develop a sidewalk where the person with the most needs is met, then we meet everyone else's needs, even people who don't really may not need it. But you have skateboarders, right?
Yeah.
They and you have people with strollers, but then you
Right.
have people who are definitely needed, like people in wheelchairs and other different
Yeah. But
yes.
the good thing is inclusion strategies. Here's the trick. I always say they benefit everybody. Like they're going to be helpful for everyone. So it's like, so embrace them and utilize them in all that you do. Yeah. I love that.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So really just looking at dealing with, as you said, that, oh, I don't know what to do. It's just like,
Mhm.
this is, because there's a wider range of diverse abilities. And I like that you said the apparent and the non-apparent. I don't know if you categorize speech impediments as a, diverse ability, but that's just one that I've struggled with since elementary school. And yeah, just from my personal experience, just wanting to speak up but not, and really having leaders and teachers who were sensitive to it, and then having some that weren't. You can really see the difference, and I really did shine when I had people that were aware of it, and that gave me some modifications, like reviewing the notes beforehand, and being exposed to what the topic's going to be, so I can prepare my thoughts beforehand.
Absolutely.
It lowers my speech impediment. So things like that, and
Perfect.
having the arts.
That's exactly it. That's exactly what we're talking about is listening to a person ahead of time, being okay with providing accommodations, not just being okay with, actually being proactive and seeking to ask, somebody, give them the opportunity when they're signing up or they're new to your class, right? You're new to the class. Is there anything that I can help to, make an accommodation, a modification to help you be more successful? Boom, then it's done, and something like that. And you've recognized the difference between perhaps a teacher who did not do that. And I would imagine that would create a lot of anxiety and then just increase the, the symptom, maybe not symptoms, but for you, versus somebody who is right out of the gate listening and trying to help you to be successful. And then I'm sure that you were, appreciated that.
Yes, for sure. But what are so that's my situation as an individual. But what are some things that team leaders can do on the corporate level? Because I do know you work with organizations as a whole. What are some first steps that people can do to make sure that they are inclusive with people with diverse abilities? I'm going to say that word like 10 times, right?
Yeah, no, I love it. I love that line of thinking too. And every business should be considering what that means for them, right? And I think it all starts with just making a statement and understanding what it is, right? So you have an inclusion statement, right, or a DEI statement, and making sure that disability is included in that. But if it's clear to your whole organization now, we are making this commitment as a business or other organization who provides something for the community, that we are going to intentionally be inclusive in our practices, right? So the starting point would be recognizing that there's a very good chance that a majority of your staff know little to nothing about, not a majority, but a lot of staff may have no experience. I've never worked with somebody with a disability. I don't know anything about being a peer to somebody or supervising someone, right? Mm-hmm. So quickly you would recognize that a training might be in good fashion, right? And even some of the biggest hurdles that people, it keeps them fearful for interacting with somebody with a disability is I might say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing. So mm-hmm. I'm going to just like back off and kind of disappear out of the lunchroom when somebody comes in, right? That kind of behavior, or just to, not even bring up the subject, when if we could just address that. So, for training on like words matter, what is the positive and empowering words that we should be using, right? It's constantly changing too, so you got to keep up with it.
Yes, they
And
are changing. Well, but before you go on, can you give a few examples? Because words
yeah,
have changed from the 60s and 70s to the
right.
90s.
Oh, yeah, yeah. One of the biggest surprises is Asperger's or Asperger's, right? Depending on how you would frame that. So Asperger's is no longer used. It's a term that is outdated, and it's been eliminated from the list of kind of what is a diagnosis. It's no longer recognized as an official diagnosis. So the reason being, well, the number one reason is that when you think about Asperger's, right? It was always came with it's okay, they're high functioning or have Asperger's, and as if that's okay, and if the other people who don't are not okay. So
Mhm.
we don't want to look at it as linear, right? Autism, or being a person who is neurodivergent, is more. We want to take more of a wheel portrayal, right? That and not, are you high or low functioning? Do you have Asperger's, which is okay, we can work with you, but if you're too low function, we might not be able to invite you in, right? When that's very harmful for both sets of folks, right? If we looked at it as a wheel, right, and you have a wheel and there's one piece of pie, and one of those pies could be social skills, right? And maybe you have less needs in social skills, and I might have more needs in that area. We might go to communication, right? What you discussed earlier. Somebody might have higher needs or less needs. So each area, we want to look at it as, what are somebody's strengths? Because too often we look at just deficits.
Yeah.
And when we're thinking about folks with disabilities, and we want to be strengths focused. So where are the strengths where they need less support, right? And where are the areas or those pieces of the pie where they might need more? Okay. So it takes us away from that linear thinking, because if somebody were, on this end and had Asperger's, and somebody might say, well, they don't need any assistance. Well, they still may need guidance or accommodations in some areas, where on the other end, it's almost like, oh, well, they're too low functioning. We don't use that term anymore. We say higher support needs, right? So we focus on the support and not give a negative connotation of their low functioning, because there's always something we're all good at, and there's always something that we can all improve on, right? So we look at it that way. But the most important with the Asperger's, and I get this a lot, like, I had no idea. We don't use the term anymore, because the Hans Asperger's, who it was named after, was involved with the Third Reich, and he was a Nazi who was involved in killing children with disabilities. So
Wow.
we from that, so that was part of the reasoning too, why we don't use that word. So that's just one. And then the other one that I think most people like, oh, I didn't know we shouldn't say that anymore, is handicap. So
Okay. Explain.
handicap parking or handicap bathroom, right? A person is not handicapped. I know, it's like, what, right? No, the environment around them creates a handicap. So if I utilized a wheelchair and I wanted to go into a restaurant and it was fully accessible, there's no problem. I go into the restaurant like every other person. But if there's steps, there's no ramps, or if it's, too cumbersome and they can't get into the bathroom because of space-wise, it's not accessible. It's the lack of a ramp. It's the lack of accessibility that creates a handicap. A person is not handicapped. Right? It's just it's a negative connotation, and the word itself. I've heard this. I probably should research and make sure it is true, but I've heard it, and I have read it before, that the word came from hand and cap, as if like somebody had their cap and they were begging. So it came from an Old English term, hand and cap. So it would indicate a person who had to beg for food or money, right? So that's, again, another negative connotation. So we want more positive and empowering words. So those are probably the two most, I think those are the ones where people in the audience go, wow, I didn't know that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
So what you do say, so that's what I want to make sure.
Okay, so
Yeah.
let me jump in there. I like to jump in every now and then, but don't forget your thought, because then we're gonna just go say, well, what do we say?
Yeah.
Or actually, yeah. Well, no, finish that part, and then I'll jump in. So what do we say?
Yeah. So we say accessible parking or accessible bathroom.
Okay, accessible.
Yeah.
Yes, I had a conversation with a wonderful thought leader, Nicole. Nicole and Andrews, just about the power of words when we're talking about inclusion, when it's coming to students from ethnic backgrounds or just different groups, and
Mhm.
just how the framing, right, the frames that we place around situations, but around people. I did a fellowship with the Be Me Fellowship under the direction of Travian Shorters, and he and the group coined a term called asset framing, of a lot of times how we frame people with their liability or not. Well, he's talking about like
Deficits.
groups,
Yep. Yep.
ethnic groups. And so we say, these at-risk teens and these
Mhm.
disadvantaged youth, and these poor kids, and these
Yeah.
homeless youth. And he's like, "Ooh, can we kind of switch that? Yes, we don't want to ignore
Yeah.
their liability." So this is a little bit different in this
Yeah.
case, but
Yeah.
we don't want to ignore. And kind of like what you were saying, like, do I just ignore that they're there? Do I
Yeah.
ignore?
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's like this is very cognitive dissonance is huge with
Mhm.
this. People don't know, and especially if you weren't raised around someone that made you think about it, right? And made you
Mhm.
process the interactions. But he said, can we start with kind of like what their strengths are and what these promising youth, these scholarly youth, and things like that, who come from low income backgrounds, or who come from who may be experiencing homelessness, right? We don't say, definitely don't say the word like bum
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
even homeless man, but we
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
a man who happens to be experiencing
Mhm.
homelessness,
Mhm.
because it in this case it doesn't put it just really allows you to be introduced to the person first.
Mhm.
um, but it could be a little bit different in this situation. Could you add some light to that? Because someone's experiencing homelessness, like that could be a temporary
Yeah.
situation. Um,
Mhm.
but people with diverse abilities, what do we do there?
How would we equate that? So
Yeah.
I have been saying we want to be strengths, not deficit focused.
Okay.
And a very interesting thing happens if I'm working, say, with a group of parents. Maybe it's all parents of kids who have, diverse abilities. And I say, go around the room and introduce yourself and tell me who you here for, right? Or what brings you here.
Mhm.
And 9 out of 10 people will say, well, my name is blank, and my daughter or my son has this, and sometimes has challenging behaviors, and they list all the diagnosis, the disabilities, the deficits, the challenges, right? And then when they're done, I say, okay, now can we go around the room? And I know you're not used to this because people don't ask that this way.
Mm. Mhm.
Tell me what makes your child shine. What do they love? What are they passionate about? And some of them go, oh, nobody's ever asked me that. So we
Mhm.
are so conditioned when we see somebody or hear about somebody has a disability, we focus on what they can't do.
Mhm.
They won't be able to. We make assumptions about what they will not be able to do. Right? When if we just start right out of the gate with what makes somebody shine. So I say, like for camps, for example, your first question on your intake form should be what makes your child shine. Because
Mhm.
number one, it's going to be allow you to focus on what do they love, what are their passions, because that's going to help drive how do we help them to be meaningfully participate and belong. And number two, it's also going to help us to stop thinking about deficits and be so focused on what somebody can't do. Because when we frame it that way, or we say somebody's a behavior kid or a troubled teen, like the same thing, right? At risk, and it changes it affects our perception of the value of people. Right.
Mhm.
And I follow something by Wolfensberger. It's called social role valorization. And we focus on somebody's strengths. And within a group, we introduce them as what are they great at? And we discover it's a discovery phase. We don't do it a lot with folks with disabilities. We should do it more with them. So discover what are they great at? What do they love? What are they passionate about? Then
Mhm.
we can provide or craft supports to help them raise that up. And what happens is their peer, right? Another teen, or if it's adults, it doesn't matter the age, they will see them as more valuable,
Mhm.
right? And then there's an increased chance of social interactions that will occur, which is very for folks with disabilities, right? They experience loneliness and isolation at a much higher rate than their non-disabled peers.
Mhm.
And if you would ask any parent of a child with a disability, what's the number one thing you want for them? I would guarantee you, at least in the top three, is going to be to make a friend.
Yeah.
right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that, see how that all ties in? And then if somebody's valued for what they bring to the table, then they're not so scary, or like, rather than the behavior kid or the autistic kid, right? Or just having these terms and labels that has nothing to do with the person themselves, what they bring to the table, right? Like you said, we need to know then how to accommodate them, but it should not be the end all or the everything that they're defined by, right? We don't want to do that otherism, like sped kids over here, right? And then regular kids over here. That's like the biggest form of otherism, if I, could ever imagine, right? That it's like less than and then more valued here. And we want to change that. So that's my goal, at least, to change that.
Yeah, there's a lot there because I come from the K-12 background, so I do have a background in education, and then I'm doing a lot of corporate training now. But I just flew in from San Jose and did a teacher training for 3 high schools on how to incorporate the arts into the curriculum, and even using the arts as a methodology for allowing more choice to express their understanding of the curriculum, right? What that look like. But to go to your point of your question form, even on like the YMCA form, I remember reading a study that said when women engineers did their exam and the information was your name and then your gender, and they were asked to identify a lot of their demographics that tend to be marginalized or discriminated against within their society. They did worse on the exam. But when those questionings were put at the end, you do the exam and then you give that information. And so because there's a lot going on underneath the radar, especially me coming here as a woman and as a person of color and as a person who is neurodivergent as well. I just have these demographics that are seen as less than. So when you prime that in me first, my performance could go down because I'm primed with, well, Janine, you're a woman and you're
not as smart as that. Yeah, it's terrible, but it's true.
I'm not gifted. My twin sister was labeled as gifted, and I was in the regular class, so that did a whole number on me too. And so, I just ask people like, "What are we doing?" Labels are so powerful,
Yeah, absolutely. And it always strikes me as, and maybe if we just become more comfortable around folks with disabilities, go up and say hello, ask a question. We tend to, particularly if it's more of a physical disability or a communication disorder where they might be non-speaking, right? That we should still, I want people to be comfortable this is a person who is interesting and has dreams and goals and things that they're interested in. So go ahead and I say, just introduce yourself, ask a question. Oh, I like your hat. Is that your favorite team? Right. And start those conversations, and then you'll feel more, it will come easier. It comes easy to me because I've done this my whole life. Like even before I started working in the field, I was just comfortable. But I do recognize that some people are a little uncomfortable around somebody who might talk differently, act differently, right? So
I love that, because I was going to ask you, what things can people do, and the curiosity is huge. I keep hearing that word, and I quickly want to talk about it. I'm doing a lot of studying in the neuroscience, which here's a brain. Yes. I travel with my brain in here and a brain right here. And looking at what a lot of the neuroscientists are saying, and then I do a lot of research in the cultural development, right? Like cultural competency, and then of course creative thinking. And what everyone is saying, and what you're saying as well, is curiosity is the first step. Instead of judgment, right? Instead of distancing, curiosity invites you in. And hey, I don't know what's going on. Let me be respectfully, right? That's key. Respectfully curious and start that bridging effect that you spoke to earlier.
Right, absolutely. And extend that also, particularly if you're thinking about kids or youth or a parent of a person with a disability, extend it to the family as well. I see this a lot. When there's programming that are offered to youth or teens or young adults, is that there comes this judgment of like that mother or that parent, right? And it's like, I say this, be a learner, not a judger. Right. So on the same thing, right? Be curious. Don't come out guns blazing about this parent didn't fill out right. This is a big thing in the world, and it could be in work settings too. Non-disclosure, right? So either a person themselves decides I'm not going to share for whatever their personal reason, and that's okay, right? Like, they may say, I just don't want to be known as the autistic man, right? Right. So we want to give somebody the choice to make that decision, but we should also create that space that they can share if they want. So, the whole bit with non-disclosure, and then there's a negative connotation without ever understanding the parent situation, right? So maybe someone signs their kid up to go to a program or a camp, and then they didn't disclose about their kiddo's challenges. And then we used to call it the Tuesday tornadoes when we were running camp. Come to Monday's great, and come Tuesday, it's like, whoa, what happened here? And then the parent, oh, by the way, they have this or that, right? And this is the way I would, talk to an organization or a business hiring folks, is that it's up to you to create that culture where they're comfortable to come tell you. So you have to be using language, and you have to have more of an invitation to please share with us, because we would like to work with you, as opposed to, list all the behaviors and then make it seem like, well, if I do, am I going to get the job, or is my kid going to get in camp, right? So create that culture where in your language too, on your website or applications, that say, we want to work with you, right? Someone who identifies as being neurodivergent, they may need to do an interview in a different way, right? Maybe just the face-to-face could just not be their cup of tea. Doesn't mean they're not qualified and they couldn't do the job effectively. We just might want to think differently about and provide that opportunity for different modifications, right? So that's important too, not to get into a, they're the bad guy because they didn't tell us about their kiddo. You don't know what has happened with that parent, right? We had a parent once, and she did come and disclose right away, but she said, I wasn't going to, but you seemed really nice and like you would at least listen. And her kid had been kicked out of 3 camps before coming to our camp.
Oh, wow.
I would imagine that if I had a job and I'm about to lose my job, and you're like, one more camp, I'm going to give this one a try. And you might not put on there that your kiddo had this behavior, that behavior, because you just need them to get in camp, and you want to cross your fingers and hope that they do okay. It's not a bad person. It's just somebody trying to survive. If you're not in their shoes, you don't know. So be gracious. And that's, part of my message too. And as an employer too, right? Be gracious, allow for modifications. Our typical way of going through the whole interview process might not work for everybody. You don't want to exclude somebody that could actually be an amazing employee, right?
Yeah, and that's where we're leading to in leadership. I have the Prismatic Leader program where I use metaphors and analogies all the time. But in fact, I just came home from Sedona yesterday, doing a keynote / workshop for the CEOs of the AZ Tech Council. And I said, when you walk out into the sunlight, you're surrounded by rainbows. Like, you're literally covered in color, but you can't see it because you don't have a prism, right?
Yeah.
But we don't think about that. Even in light, even in indoor light, any type of light source, you're surrounded by colors, but you can't. So light is paradoxical in that way. It reveals, it shows you what's around, but it also conceals. It conceals the hidden colors of the rainbow that are there. It's what makes up the light. But once you have a prism, the prism separates the light, and it can see the hidden colors, right, that are there. And great leaders for this next future of work, especially as we really look at inclusive practices for our different groups and our different diverse abilities. Great leaders are the ones who are prismatic. They see their inner strengths and their inner goals and gifts, but they also are sensitive and observant to see it in other people. So how do you really, create those skills? Because they're skills, you can improve them, that empathy skill, observational skill, perspective shifting. We talk a lot about that. So with that, I'm going to bring up perspective shifting with the work of Dr. Michael Platt, who is the director of the Neuroscience Wharton Initiative. over at the Wharton Business School. And he has a wonderful book. I tell everyone to get it. If they've seen me for a while, you've seen me hold up the book. I tried to find it back there, but it's somewhere back there, called The Leader's Brain.
Okay.
And he ends the book with saying, we have failed our neurodivergent and population and those with disabilities. We're not really accessing the diamond gifts
Yeah.
that they have to offer. What do you say about that?
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. And we tend not to do it. Again, we stay deficit focused instead of the gifts or the gems that somebody might bring. And I think it's just, culturally or historically as well, maybe this comes into play, that folks with disabilities have been segregated, right?
Mhm.
And they have been institutionalized. And then when there was deinstitutionalization, they were still segregated. They lived in their own special group homes, right? And they had special staff who worked with them, and they go to a special school and they have a special job, right? I mean, I guess you can tell special isn't one of my favorite words, but there's always, we've created this kind of culture that there are what I used to be, right? There's special people who work with those folks.
Mhm,
And
mhm,
then so that creates a mindset in everybody else. Well, it's not my responsibility to get to know
mhm.
them. Like they have their own
Over
special people, and
there.
they and
Uh,
they have and they have their friends who also have disabilities, right? And not even considering that, oh, maybe I have a responsibility here, right? To be opening up, right? And getting to know someone, and looking at their strengths, right? And I think that that's a big part of it, that there's a mindset that you have to have specialty in
mhm.
order to work with these folks, right? And that's not necessarily always true.
Yeah. So yeah, when I make the screen big like that, I'm just highlighting you. I want to talk about something that changed my life. I'm going to see if I can find it. I don't know. Yes. Wait 1 second. If you could actually talk about Helen Keller.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if you know if you were aware of her work,
yeah,
or but she came here. Please let me know if I'm using the right terms. But
yeah,
do you
yeah,
say mute still, or but unable to speak? She
yeah.
was blind and she was deaf at the same time, correct?
She's deafblind. Yep, yep,
Yeah, and
absolutely.
her teacher, I believe the movie's called The Miracle
The
Worker.
miracle worker, right? And it's Anne, isn't it? I think her teacher
Yes,
was Anne something.
I
I've
have.
been to the museum where about her, and it was very fascinating because she's
Okay,
local to Massachusetts. I'm in Massachusetts, so that's where
okay. Oh,
yeah.
there's a
So
museum. And
yeah.
so just I'm fascinated with just historical stories and thinking transcendently on, okay, well, what does that mean for my life, or how does that mean for my community? And just seeing, I heard Anne's teacher when she was young, there was someone who really impacted her life. But just having Helen Kellen's teacher just be curious, really, and work
Yeah.
past the biases and assumptions that everyone else had,
Mhm.
right? And didn't
Right.
give up. My son's first word was agua, which is water, and Helen's
Mhm.
first word was water, or that first concept she really understood.
Understood.
But you've seen her work, and she's quoted
Mhm.
everywhere.
Yeah.
What the world would have missed out on had someone not reached out and build a bridge. Can you talk about
Right.
that
Yeah.
connected with what
where,
we
where we are today. And I think there's a kind of something I'm making a connection to is the term non-speaking, right, or nonverbal, right? And the idea is that non-speaking is actually a more appropriate word if we get back to linguistics there, because just because someone doesn't have the verbal ability to speak like you and I may, or they might be deaf or hard of hearing, does not mean that their brain isn't working and have wonderful ideas. And I
Mhm.
think there's usually the assumption that they don't, right? They don't have anything to say, and that a person, let's say with
Good.
cerebral palsy, who might appear right in a certain way or not be able to communicate communicate in the ways that you and I do, but they still communicate. It's just different. And so that's another word that instead of nonverbal, we say non-speaking, because then that gives the credit to that their brains still may be like able to have concepts and ideas. And now we have all these communication facilitation boards, and we're able to provide an opportunity for someone to share. And we've found out that, there have been many people who for decades, it was assumed that they had no cognitive abilities. And they did. And it was somebody like Helen Keller's teacher, or people who have created these communication devices that have opened up worlds that are just incredible. So there's a book that I refer, and there's a statement I love. Presume competence. Right. So particularly with folks with disabilities. And the book is by Marianne Leone, and it's called Knowing Jesse. I just love this book, and I listen to it too. I actually, and I used to be like, oh, well, I listen to my books, but that's the way that I learn. So there's nothing wrong with that. I had to get over that fear that like, oh, I'm not as intelligent because I'm not reading the book. Well, my mind does not work that way anymore. I need to listen to it when I'm going on a walk. Anyways, I listened to the book and I just fell in love with it. And this mama said, presume competence, because she knew her boy was very intelligent. She knew it. And nobody believed her. The schools didn't believe her because he had cerebral palsy, and because of the way, his body was formed and his hands were formed, and the way he, lack of being able to speak. But she could read things in his eyes and tell. And and for years they just poo-pooed her, and it was like, oh, okay, mom, like that kind of, really just horrible way of approaching something. It's just like poo-pooing it, like it's not, oh, well, sure, mom, he's intelligent. Well, finally those communication devices came by, and he wrote poetry. He was so smart. He was so gifted. And the mom knew that. And it was because of that device, or it was probably because of, we can trace it back to Helen Keller and somebody thinking differently, that just because her voice doesn't work or her ears don't work doesn't mean her mind isn't working.
That is so good. And I want to transition into this aspect and see what your thoughts about this. In my research on intercultural creativity, which is really based on how does culture influence our creative capacities, right? How we see ourselves as creatives, not just artistic, but ability to think of new ideas and be innovative and push them into the world. But also, how do we look at people and assume, right, their creative potential? Are our biases and cultural lenses influencing the way that we interpret their creative gifts or their creative potentials? With that, so glad you brought that up, because you just totally just segued me into this. For my mother did a great job just raising us to be exploratory. We're going to talk about your travels really quick, but just traveling, getting out around people who may be different than us, really being comfortable with making connection. A lot of people may not have that experience, especially if you grew up in a small town and you didn't go anywhere and there's only 200 people in your town and everyone looks like you, believes like you, everything's the same. That level of intercultural, they call it intercultural competence, may be on the lower side. But what my school did that I worked at New Academy Canoga Park in Canoga Park, California, was the great librarian. She's brilliant, Kelly Spector. She really made sure that we did one school, one book projects where the whole school read the same book. And the books she chose were amazing. And she even got in contact with the authors, and the authors came to visit. And so one of the first books was Wonder. Have you read Wonder? And it turned into
I saw the movie. Yes.
The book. And it's really part of the impetus of the work I do now, because every chapter, the characters have a song. So I put together like a soundtrack of the book. But then I had the kids just do different artistic work with just, it is what it is. I'm not going to say I'm not a good painter, because I'm very careful of my words. But I just, painted this. And so this was, about a boy who has a facial deformity as well. And the author saw that in her real life and decided to write a book about it. But the book that I wanted to share with you. Have you read Sharon Draper's book, Out of My Mind?
I have, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
a while, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and
Mm,
I they may be making it into a film, but the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this book is because I don't have any personal relationships with someone that has cerebral palsy.
mhm,
But here's
mhm.
the power of fiction or autobiographical fiction or that I now have a perspective shift. Like in my brain, I have the story of someone who does have cerebral palsy because I took the time to read this with
Yeah,
my students, with the whole school.
yeah.
And I ended up teaching at Cal State Northridge how to integrate the arts into your classroom. And here's one of the pictures my students did with the fishbowl and just the fish jumping out of it, and there's a school bus there, and there's a wheelchair here, and
Yeah.
exactly what you spoke to of she
Mhm.
had cerebral palsy. They didn't know what she was thinking, but the aide knew that she was brilliant
I
inside,
love
just
that.
couldn't
Yeah.
communicate. And
Yeah.
then they got that machine. And so, how
Mhm.
much great ideas are we missing out on
Ah,
because
tremendous,
of these
right?
policies?
You
Yeah.
think about that creativity now, and if I remember the story, there was one aide who was not good and just did, totally shut her down. And it was the other paraprofessional who really saw something in her and saw that light and saw her shine and allowed her that opportunity. That was fabulous. But yes, imagine everything that we do not see that somebody can bring to the table, right? Particularly if you think about neurodiverse minds. I mean, we need those minds to be part of everything that we're doing. I would, you want to hire someone who is neurodivergent or have, right? Because they're, it could be the great problem solvers or see things differently than maybe I see it. So, yeah, we might be missing out on a lot if we don't open up to looking at all types of diversity, right? So, and all dimensions of like diverse abilities. So, absolutely. And I think that creativity, the whole creative side, part of the creative side, I don't know, to me in that book, it was perfectly, makes me think of it. And I remember the fish and the fish coming out of the fishbowl, but to listen, that's such a big part of everything that I teach, is to be a good listener,
Mm,
right? Whether it's to a person with a disability or their family member, we have to be a good listener, and then collaborate with them and work together, and be okay with being vulnerable to say, I don't know how to do this, but can you help me, right? And then when we let that vulnerability down, we can then work with someone to let their true self shine and let their creativity explode, because there's a very good chance that you're missing out on incredible talent, right? Or those traits that you want in an employee or a peer or a coworker or somebody in your book club, right? You want those traits there. You want those conversations there. So listening is a big part of being inclusive.
yes.
Listening well.
Yes, that's huge. I have a small course on just listening because part of my research with the neurosomatic creativity is how do we use the arts to strengthen these skills. Like if you're a musician, you have to listen well, especially if you're part of an ensemble, right? You got to know your
Mhm.
part, but you got to know what everyone else is doing too, and
Yeah,
stay in time. And
right.
so my suggestion and my thesis is how do the arts strengthen the leadership and human skills so we can do this work, and so what does that look like? Wow, lots there. You are brilliant. I hope people really go to your website. Where is it? I thought I brought it here. I'll go bring it
Yeah.
up. Go to your website and check you out, and really bring you in to look at their policies, bring you in to just even walk the grounds and say, okay, well, what does this look like?
Absolutely.
I remember
Absolutely.
hearing the story about how the ADA came into being, and there were people who were in wheelchairs, and they just dragged their bodies up the
Yeah.
steps. Yeah, do
Mhm.
you want to talk about that really quick?
Yeah. So the history on that, it was. I'm skipping on the name of the movement, but Judith Human, I believe, is the person who was leading that in the before the ADA, right? And it was just about human rights and getting disability rights or human rights, and that they literally got out of their wheelchairs to make that statement and climb the steps to to bring awareness to disability rights and movements and accessibility, right? That they couldn't even, how can you get to a job if you can't get on a bus?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that was a big movement. And as much as we've come far since the ADA, we still have so much further to go. Right. I mean, and the ADA is just a, I often say it's like the ground, not the, right. We want to go beyond ADA to universal design principles. So
Yes.
yeah.
And that's for these groups, but for so many other groups as well. Because what I found is, hearing stories, like when I found out that story, and then I found two wonderful women who are who one's an artist, and they were just talking back and forth, and the camera was filming them, and she was saying, yeah, in my wheelchair, this is back in the 70s, I couldn't go into the grocery store because there's these poles in front of the door to not allow carts to come out. Well, what you didn't know, it doesn't allow wheelchairs to go in.
Imagine that.
Her mom would have to sit her outside of the grocery store with the dog while the mom had to go grow. I can't imagine leaving my child. Like I'm getting emotional just thinking about what people had to go through.
What they had to go through. A good movie to watch and recommend is Crip Camp. And I think you'd really put that on your list. It's pretty fascinating. It's about Crip, CRIP, Camp, CAMP.
Okay.
And it won quite a lot of awards too.
Okay, yeah, and that's, as we give people implementable things to actually do, like what can you do tomorrow, right? It's stories. The brain is built on stories, so it's hard for me to observe, right? That's one of our 7 gems, the third gem, I think. It's hard for me to observe something that I'm not physically aware of, right? So when I had my child and we had strollers everywhere, I became physically aware of buildings that did not have ramps, and like it shot up into my observation realm. But before that, I didn't really care if it didn't, not that I didn't care, but I just didn't notice it.
Exactly. And I think that I love what you said earlier about the school where they all read a book together. And I think either reading books or watching movies about persons with disabilities, like from their story, their perspective, can be very helpful. And if you can do it in a way, maybe, suggest something for a book club, or if you're involved in a school, right? Or just have a movie night and have movies that touch upon disability inclusion, and then have discussions afterwards, right? Those are ways we can raise up and be in somebody else's shoes for a minute to understand better, right? Like knowing Jessie, like I learned so much about how a parent had to fight for what should be just their rights for their child to go to school and be educated to the best, within the least restrictive environment. And that's, you have to listen to the stories. I spent a lot of time listening to either persons with disabilities or their family members.
One of the fun.
Oh, sorry. Yes, no, that is good. Making that connection, because you may not have someone in your social sphere that you can automatically connect to right away, but that's a first step. Reading those books, seeing those movies with other people, and having that, because it leads to something called transcendent thinking, which is now this person's lived experience is actually change my neural networks. Do I just continue to ignore it, or do I actually engage with it? And what does it mean for me in my life, for my social sphere, but the world at large? I wanted to show this small clip of Dr. Mary Helen Emerendo Yang over at USC, who talks about why transcendent thinking is really important and how we can employ it, in all areas, including inclusion work, but also creativity work as well.
Undergirding our education system is the idea that the purpose of school is to support learning outcomes. And learning outcomes are operationalized mainly around 2 things, both to do with memory. One is memory for semantic information, for facts, and the other is memory for procedures. But in the human brain, there's a third kind of memory that is absolutely fundamental to our growth and development and well-being, and that is autobiographical memory. Autobiographical memory is the story we tell ourselves the stories of who we are and what we stand for and how we want the world to be, this sort of transcendent thinking that young people do forms the kind of hat stand that all of the other learning gets layered on top of. In essence, organizing the way in which we call up our memories, the way in which we enact our skills, the way in which we notice what needs to happen in different situations. Those are the things that really make us human, and those are the things that we need to reorganize our educational experiences around. Want kids to be obvious that there is a fundamental mismatch. We want kids to start with the small building blocks, to learn the little pieces and start to put those together, but that is not how the human mind grows. The human mind grows and develops by engaging with deep, powerful ideas and then working backward to inform the meaning that you're making. What our and many people's psychosocial and educational research is showing is that supporting young people to respectfully and in a developmentally appropriate way engage with the complexities of the social and moral lives that they and others are living and that we are co-creating together in our society is what is deeply, deeply motivating and purpose generating in all people, but especially in young people. So when our educational system thinks of the learning process as enabling a young person to think about the kind of world that they live in, but also the kind of world they want to create, that is good education.
All right. What are your thoughts about that?
Wow. I love that ending and what the kind of world you want to live in. But what I took from that, but also that other people are living in too, and maybe, drawing from that too, because we're not it isn't just the world I want to live in. I also have to be aware of how others experience the world. So I think that fits perfectly on what she was saying.
Yeah, yes. And all the neuroscience is showing us that our brains are affecting one another. Now they're doing fMRIs has been on the scene for about 25, 30 years, but just new technology of like I can hook my brain up to a machine and hook yours up, and they can see, okay, well, how are our brains interacting with one another, right? So not just that individual interaction, but the co-interaction. Mm-hmm. So when I think about that, when I think about the next generation that is preparing the landscape, they're going to be building the buildings in 20 years that people need to have access to. So do they have the neural networks and the stories here because they read books like Out of My Mind and Wonder, and they saw films like Crip Camp, and they make connections with people with different lived experiences in order for them to create for all.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love it. That's what I'm trying to do.
I know.
That's what I'm trying to do, is just introduce a different way of looking at things and knowing that inclusion is all of our responsibilities.
Wonderful. So we're going to wrap up now, but we are the gems. Diamonds the diamonds are my logo. What's one gem that you would want to leave our audience with as they go to your website, mergeconsulting.org, as they look up your work and they bring you in to really make sure that they have inclusive environments and cultures for all? What's one of your gems that you would like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think it's been popping up a lot recently. Inclusion cannot be done by the disability community or folks that support them, whether it's family members or an agency. Inclusion, by the term including in, has to be done by the general population, our neighbors, our family members, right, our coworkers. It has to be done by folks that are not involved in the disability community. They're the ones who have to invite in. So I'm really trying to get that line of thinking, because historically we have had this mindset that, oh, well, those special people have special people who take care of them. Not my responsibility, but it actually is all of our responsibilities. And hopefully, like the film we just saw, is that all these little nuances we're learning and discovering that we can think about, I'm going to run organize a 5K race. Now I'll be more thoughtful and think about an adaptive segment for that, for persons who utilize a wheelchair, right? So anything that you do you can open your mind and think about who's not at the table and who should be at the table representing disability inclusion.
Yeah, who's not at the table and who's at the table and feel they can't speak up or communicate, should I say?
Yeah.
Right. So those are wonderful questions. And there's one more point that you brought up, but I lost it. So thank you. Oh, wow. Thank you so much. I finally got you on. I know we've been kind of going back and forth. You're a world traveler as well, so we didn't get to that, but just talking about how that increases your creative thinking and increases your ability to connect with people from different lived experiences, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to come back for part 2 and talk more about that and what I've experienced in the world, right?
Yes. So thank you all for joining us for the Create and Grow podcast. We love bringing you the top minds who are really looking at creativity from an interesting viewpoint and making sure everyone has a right to that word. Because I say, if you were born and your heart is beating and you're here, you are creative. You have the ability to offer something, something to the world. We may not all be Helen Kellens or Martin Luther King's or someone huge, right? But we all have something to offer to the world. So thank you so much. Be aware that we are launching our online course, Intercultural Creativity, the introductory course to the 7 gems, right? Mindset, emotion, empathy, observation, curiosity, perspective shifting, authentic adaptation, and being a bridge across cultures. If you want some really great training in that area, check out our online course that will be coming out within the next month or so. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Next time. Bye-bye.